Good morning, Stallions and Stallionettes. I know that's the time of day because I'm wearing my Dexter flannel. My feathers are ruffled and I got a cup of jet fuel in my left hand. But what you care about is what's in my right hand, which is going to be the GuliKit KK3 Max. I'm sure you caught my review from yesterday. At least 14,000 of you did. And unlike Bethesda, I'm all about that free DLC. So this is going to be an add-on or expansion pack for yesterday's review, which I do recommend that you watch in its entirety first, as I go in depth part by part, component by component with this awesome $80 Pro controller. But I'm a wiser man than I was yesterday. I learned some new things from the awesome comment section, the phenomenal Stallions and Stallionettes trotting around the stable, also just me spending more stick time with this gamepad, some things I noticed I want to bring to the attention of my audience. So I'm going to run the El Capitan's intro, fix this mop atop my dome, and we'll talk about the KK3 Max.
Welcome aboard, Stallion or Stallionette.
Over 200 gamepads tested, not letting off the throttle, controller looking like a model, reviews go down smooth, pass me the bottle, I got paddles, back to the lobby with a waddle.
Gaming news, gear reviews, more controllers than you can use.
A man of many faces, recording by the Smokin' Aces. I wasn't born the controller captain, it was you bucking Broncos that made it happen.
Enough input delay, this video is slapping.
Alrighty, Stallions and Stallionettes, welcome to the GamerHeaven. I'm your host, AK40 Kevin. The first one we got to talk about is I mentioned several times that this had RGB, but it's actually not. It's just a static color, technically too. It starts white during the startup animation and then goes solid blue, but you can dim and fully disable it. I guess this just comes from habit. Whenever I see lighting, I'm thinking, oh, I can change that in some kind of software. It's red, green, blue, RGB lighting. This controller is just a static single color. The next one, the thumbstick caps do remove, pop off of the KK3. However, there's no included swappable options, but for around $15, you can get a 6-pack with different heights, so the thumbsticks technically do remove. I should have mentioned during the initial review, because the perk or benefit of that is that you can pop these suckers off and then install your KontrolFreeks or your snap over thumbstick caps, so you're not putting undue pressure on the thumbstick modules. Granted, these are Hall effect joints and shouldn't get stick drift for you, but the force of installing and removing caps over and over, once you pick the ones that you want, you should just leave them on until they get worn down, which should be like a long time. But the thumbstick caps do pop off pretty sick and should have been mentioned during the initial review. Something to note, the mechanism that holds them on place is not metal and magnetized like the Razor series or the Elite series 2. However, they're just plastic and held on with friction, and I did read one or two comments saying that these were just popping off in gameplay, and I'm wondering how. I'm gonna hold the entire controller's weight from the thumbstick caps, shake it up and down, and when you're gaming, you're actually pushing down on the thumbstick somewhat. I'm not judging, I'm just trying to comprehend or process through my neural planes how these are popping off in gameplay, because like I can barely get these to come off just normally. The next one is going to be addressing a quality control issue, or a QC reputation, if you will. I mentioned in the initial review from yesterday that there really wasn't one in existence from GuliKit, or if there was, it was such a small scale that it really wasn't even worth talking about. But we're going to talk about it here because several more individuals have popped out of the woodworks complaining about their shitty gamepads. So we're going to talk about it here. I've heard a lot of complaints about stuck-in face buttons on the King Kong 2 from a year and a half ago, the black controller that was not a Pro controller variant, and then also this controller, which you have to keep in mind just came out. It's only been out for about a month or so. Not very many individuals have their hands on it, and the fact that there's already so many complaints right out of the gate really doesn't bode well. There's another controller that's having several issues, a $200 Xbox controller I reviewed recently, and there is going to be a part 3 review where I not bash it, but just explain what's going on with that gamepad. It's one that a lot of you have probably purchased as per a recommendation from WA, and it's not bad, but there's some issues. We'll talk about it in another video. There were some very rare meaning 2 or less individuals mentioning certain problems. Like one person said that the bumpers were janked up. He was very stern in his comment. I think he started it with, this controller's a piece of shit. The S was spelled as a $sign. I don't know if that's to be cool or so the automatic bot moderation that happens on YouTube didn't filter out the profanity word or what, but you know, this controller's money sign shit. Here's why: the bumpers don't be bumping people off. I had to take it apart and do this and that. And if all that's true, yeah, that's a very frustrating experience, and I'm sorry that happened to you. That sucks ass. But that's the kind of experience I probably wouldn't even mention during a QC reputation section, because it's only one individual out of thousands of these units that have already gone out. However, when I'm seeing 10, 12, a baker's dozen mentioning, hey, my face buttons are stuck in, that's a large scale issue. And awkwardly enough, we're going to talk about it in just a second here. Those buttons actually do have a tap life cycle and are, I'm going to use air quotes because these fingers have to be up for this, mechanical switches. We are going to put in the swimmer's putty and do a deep dive into that topic. Are these mechanical switches? If they are, and they really do have a tap life cycle, why are they fucking up right out of the gate? Are they actually tested before shipping? Physically tested? Are they actually mechanical switches? Just because you read that on a manufacturer's landing page, and just because they have an orange plastic stem that snaps in the top of the face button, does not mean that they're mechanical face buttons. Just because GuliKit claims they are mechanical face buttons does not mean that that information is correct or accurate. If I were to make a video about all of the controller misinformation that I've debunked over the last 4 years directly from manufacturers, brought it to their attention privately through emails or through my reviews, and then a couple of days or weeks later had them make a revision or change to their website, to their landing page, it would be a long video. It would be timestamped for sure. We're not going to get into it here, but this might be one of those situations. If it is a mechanical button, it's faulty, it's shitty, it's not working for a lot of gamers. And it also doesn't feel like any mechanical switch that anyone would want. Sorry, I'm jumping way ahead to this next section, but I was getting kind of passionate about it because there were a lot of comments about it. And the way they were going about it was kind of like I was a Nimrod, like I didn't know that these were mechanical switches, or like I had missed something, which is totally fine if that were the case, but it wasn't. And it's more of just me not believing that GuliKit is actually putting the part or component in the gamepad that they say they are. We'll talk about it later. It's frustrating. But the point of this section is it does appear there is some kind of a quality control problem coming out of the factory with these KK3s. So do proceed with caution, although this is an $80 gamepad, not saying that's cheap. That's a lot of money, depending on how you frame it. But in comparison to $200+ controllers that I've reviewed that are having similar issues, it might not sting as bad. Not to mention, I do always recommend purchasing these controllers through Amazon, Walmart, Best Buy, some kind of a reputable vendor that has a solid in-place customer support and warranty policy, where if you need to make a return, refund, or just swap it out for a freshie, you can do that damn near no questions asked. You're not really going to get that from AliExpress, Temu, Alibaba, Wish.com. I did mention during my initial review that I wish that the paddles and half domes were actually physically labeled G1 through G4, so you didn't have to guess where you're putting them, and they actually are physically labeled. However, I had to use the macro lens of my camera. I wish they were labeled for human eyes and not macro lenses on cameras. It's freakishly small. You can see it with your bare eyes. You just have to look very, very close. I also saw several questions asking if the Elite Series 2 and concurrently the scuff paddles for the Elite Series 2 fit, and unfortunately neither of them do. It's a different mechanism that snaps into the back of the plastic shell. It's physically smaller on the GuliKit to where the Elite Series 2 paddles and coincidentally any aftermarket paddles such as scuff or extreme rate will not fit on the KK3. However, since they are swappable, removable, it does open up the aftermarket for third-party options on Amazon like Extreme Rate and Play Vital to make their own custom shapes, colors, etc. I did see a couple of comments that were very dissatisfied that I didn't mention that this controller had analog triggers. That's the standard, that's the default. If it doesn't have trigger stops or locks, which this one does, a controller is going to have analog triggers, which are good for racing games and whatnot, let you modulate the throttle and brake. And I usually mention that in controller reviews, but this time I didn't, and by golly jeepers that I faced the repercussions. One of the comments I actually removed because the guy was just simply being a prick as opposed to just being like, hey, you should mention that these have analog triggers. And my response should have been, hey, all controllers have analog triggers unless they have a trigger stop or lock system. Now, granted, on the Switch platform, that isn't always the case because those controllers usually do not. They're on-off, 0 to 100. They don't have that linear squeeze where you can modulate the throttle and brake in a racing game. And since this is a Switch platform controller, Switch and PC, it should have been worth a mention that these are analog triggers. Won't make that mistake again. The buttons installed the KK3 are the second generation mechanical buttons, which offer you enhanced reliability. Where's that tap life cycle? I saw it floating around the comments section, but where is it on the landing page? Hyper responsive actuation feels exactly like a stock membrane switch on an Xbox or PlayStation controller. Great tactility feels exactly like the stock membrane switch on an Xbox or PlayStation controller. Replaceable button cap. Yes, that is cool having that cosmetic option of going from the Switch layout to the Xbox and PlayStation layout. But let's see if we can get a little bit more information about these second gen mechanical buttons, shall we? Let's scroll on down to the bottom, see if there's any fine print down here. Interesting. You would think if these were high quality mechanical switches that the manufacturer landing page would be toting a bunch of information such as a tap life cycle, a little bit more than 3 vague talking points. Okay, do a little Control F for face button. The D-pad and face buttons operate on a membrane switch as opposed to clicky dome switches. You're goddamn right that they do. Can't really find any information about those face buttons tap life cycle wise on the landing page on Amazon either. It just says replaceable button, and we know that they replace. Let's go to their website and look at their buttons, shall we? Come over here to products. I'm just doing this like a big dramatic journey for effect, I guess. guess. I know exactly where these are. It's over here in the product page. Long life mechanical button. And keep in mind what's in the KK3 is supposed to be the next version or iteration of these. But the first gen switches, which you can see a really nice visual diagram, a parts breakout here, has a tap life cycle of 50 million clicks, or as they word it here with the terrible verbiage, but 50 million times life in comparison to the 1 million clicks of a silicone or membrane button, which isn't always the case. I have membrane button controllers that I've had for years, and I'm sure I've clicked the buttons more than 1 million times and they still work. That's just the minimum rating. Now, I do believe this chart is supposed to represent actuating force, so just like mechanical switches on a keyboard, whether you're going with linear, tactiles, or clickies, you generally have some kind of a chart like this on the Gateron website or wherever you're picking up your switches, so you can figure out where the pre and post travel is, how much actuating force, stuff like that. So that's cool that GuliKit shows us that. What's not cool is how these buttons actually work, how they are implemented IRL. This all looks great. It tastes really good on the manufacturer's landing page, but then you get to actually pressing them and they feel just like a stock membrane button, and unfortunately also have the same quality control issues where the King Kong 2 and indeed even the KK3 Max, this controller that's only been out for about a month, are having stuck-in face buttons, which if these are high-quality mechanical switches and they spent half the time and energy they did putting this web page together with these killer diagrams, they spent that into the R&D of these switches, actually making them feel good to actuate or click, indeed giving them durability of 50 million times life, that's fun, or tap life cycle, then we wouldn't have an issue here, and maybe I would have mentioned them during my initial review. But the fact that these GuliKit membrane buttons have been somewhat of a marketing gimmick for about 1.5 years, and now these second gen ones are a second gen bullshit. Instead of just talking more words, let me just get to the damn point. I should have mentioned that this controller does have second generation mechanical switches with a tap life cycle of 50 million clicks. That was my bad. The manufacturer's bad would be producing the same mechanical switches that they've been using on their last controller version 1.5 years ago, bringing those over to the new controller, calling them Gen 2 by changing the plastics on the top here from gray to orange. I swear to God, they feel and perform like these Gen 1s over here. But hey, it's got an orange stem. It's got to be different. But let's see if we can find those Gen 2 buttons on their website though, yeah? In future reviews, I'm going to be returning to the OG ways of me mentioning features that a gamepad have, even if I consider them to be a marketing gimmick or just simply incorrect. I either don't believe that that controller has those components, it's either been proven through teardowns or disassemblies, or just the gosh darn feel. I mean, we all have fingertips and a brain here. When you click a switch, you can tell, is this membrane or is it mechanical? They feel different. And yes, there are mechanical switches that do feel a little membrane-like, hybrids and whatnot. Razer's used them in some of their keyboards in the past. Controller-wise, you can definitely tell if it's a mechanical or membrane switch. And just because you change the plastic housings and make a really slick landing page with a couple of high-resolution photos and some sick typographical errors, some weird sputtered-out sentence fragments because it's translated from Chinese to English with AI, doesn't make the face buttons feel or perform better. I can attest to the feel. They feel just like a stock membrane switch. My comment section can attest to the quality control. There's already several complaints of stuck-in face buttons. So if these are indeed some kind of awesome Gen 2 upgraded, enhanced mechanical switch, we should not be having these quality control issues. But on my part, I will be sure to mention if a controller has a specific feature, even if it doesn't, debunk it or just talk about it, which we usually do, but I didn't do that with this controller. People called me on it. Hey man, this has mechanical buttons. Does it really? Or is that what's on the GuliKit website? I've done 2 teardowns or disassemblies on my original King Kong 2, the black controller, and I've inspected those first generation gray housing mechanical buttons, and they do look different than a membrane switch, but the quality control issues and the feel are that of a membrane switch, so do better with your mechanical buttons, GuliKit. The next issue I saw floating around the comment section was several complaints of terrible input lag or delay on this controller. This is just gaming peripheral 101. Input lag or delay directly correlates with refresh/polling rate. I've heard the 2 terms used interchangeably, but basically they refer to the same core fundamental. How many times does your gaming peripheral, your mouse or controller, communicate with your PC, communicate your movements? So according to this handy dandy chart, which I generally have on screen while I'm running my speed test, a higher refresh rate or polling rate will lead to lower input lag or delay. This has been the case on mice and controllers for decades. It's just how it works. It's science. Is that to say that a controller or mouse with a high refresh or polling rate can't have some input lag or delay issues? No, and that's where you're all extremely correct. There can be some stutter or sputter issues when it comes down to jitter, or small inconsistencies or sputters when you're scrolling through the numbers manually in X input. When you see a large or small number, an outlier, a little sputter, a little jitter that doesn't match up with the rest of its comrades, that is going to be an inconsistency in the connection of your controller, whether you're going wired or wireless. Does the KK3 Max have this? Not that I've personally noticed yet, however, we are going to test it in this video. The first thing I recommend you do is that initial update, which you are implored to do from the instruction placard. I know a lot of us just chuck that in the trash and don't even read the instructions, but make sure you adhere to that one, that initial firmware patch or update, as it does seem to do wonders for this controller, specifically in the input lag or delay department. Now, the manufacturer GuliKit is claiming 1000 Hz polling rate, which will give you around 1 millisecond of input lag or delay when you're going wired or wireless, but only with that dongle. If you're using Bluetooth, you're getting 125 Hz polling rate. As we saw from the testing in the first video, it wasn't very consistent, and also peak speeds weren't great either. Input lag or delay wise, if you scroll through the numbers manually after running 1000 sample X input tests, we're going to see a whole hell of a lot of zeros, a couple of high-end ones. But if you average all these out, you are indeed going to be around the 1 millisecond of input lag or delay mark. The reason you can't really judge the average here or the polling rate is because you have this large outlier, which is going to be one large number right here at the top from when I just started spinning the sticks. But we're going to go into GamepadLa and see if we can mitigate that. And we are indeed showing 1000 Hz polling right here. But what's a little bit weird is stability is actually over 100%, which I've never seen, which potentially could be causing the communication issues that players are complaining about. Stability generally shouldn't go over 100%. Okay, there we go. Now it's lower. Jesus, funky chicken. Over my shoulder, we have a Samsung Odyssey G8 monitor, which can hit 240 Hz in 4K. You don't have to bump it down to 1440p or 1080p to hit that absurd frame rate. I knew there was a reason I bought this thing, which I'm a little bit steamy. It's 34% off on Amazon right now, which is almost $500 cheaper than when I paid for it like 6 months ago. And this is the first real world practical test of the 240 Hz for me, so an exciting day. But with the combination of this monitor and this camera, which has a 1080p 240 FPS mode, we are going to be able to run a slow motion test to physically measure while pressing a button to my character jumping or eating a banana. Well, maybe not eating a banana, probably jumping or punching, a measurable movement. This thing is linked in the description below, by the way. 34% off right now. A few notes before we get down to business.
Can we get down to business?
I have no programs running in the background of my PC, especially heavy programs like OBS. I'm running in full screen 4K 239 Hz mode, and this is holding pretty much a rock solid 240 Hz, which is awesome. This is a 4090 equipped PC, and that will help with us hitting that targeted frame rate of 240 Hz. That and our selection of game here, going with something like this, a less resource intensive, less graphically, not very articulate today, but you know what I'm talking about. We're not looking at some graphic realism. Oh my god, that looks like I'm watching TV game. It's cell shaded. Well, not cell shaded, but comic book style animation. Just run the fucking test. Alright, so that test was wired via the USB-C cable, which should give us the fastest and most consistent speeds. We chose a game and a PC that we know could hold our targeted frame rate of 240 Hz, and we remembered to put our camera in the right mode, HD 240 FPS. Now, I quickly found out that jumping in that game was not the ideal button to be using because you can actually hold down the button and then release it for a longer jump, you know, kind of like Tony Hawk's Pro Skater. So that's why I started doing those dodge rolls, because that's not a hold and release, that's just a press it and you do that motion on screen. I'm gonna say no to the whole input lag or delay debacle, at least on my end. However, different games could perform differently, also different platforms. If you're playing on PC with the dongle versus on Switch via Bluetooth, you might be having different experiences. I did hear some players saying that the Rocket League players, I know that's a very high-speed game where milliseconds of input lag or delay really matter, so maybe you're noticing something that I'm not in this slow motion test. I did see a couple of comments comparing the GameSir G7 SE to this controller, the KK3. That comparison I just don't get, because that is a $45 wired Xbox Xbox controller versus an $80 wireless Switch and PC controller. They're just different categories, and also the feature sets are quite a bit different too. Quite simply put, the KK3 has more, such as trigger stops, removable thumbstick caps. Granted, there's no included swappable options, but you can buy them. 2 additional rear inputs, and you can actually remove all of them, an included carrying case, mechanical buttons with swappable plastic button caps, just more features overall, but it's also $35 more. What I do think is a strong comparison to make is the FlyDigi Vader 3 Pro, which happened to bring home the Controller of the Year award. So it's obviously a hell of a beastly gamepad at $90, only $10 more than the KK3. Now I can make a comparison video going part by part, component by component, because there are aspects of each controller I like more, but just to not waste your time and to answer everyone's question, I do believe the Vader 3 Pro is a far superior gamepad. It's only $10 more. Instead of a somewhat uncomfortable rear button suite with the half domes and the metal paddles that stick too far from the rear shell, you have 4 buttons that are sunk flush with the rear shell, and it ergonomically feels better. And then you have trigger stops that don't have all that dead and take up or slop. A much better D-pad, just much better on every level. Slightly more accurate gyroscope motion aiming in my test, and that is a new segment that's going to be slid in my future controller reviews, is me actually testing the gyroscope just for about 15-30 seconds. Well, I'll be testing it longer than that, but you're only going to see a snippet of that, and that is by popular request. Only from a small amount of people, but several requests from those people. They really want it, so you're going to get that section. Mechanical face buttons that feel like mechanical face buttons, 2 additional buttons. It cosmetically looks better, and the overall package is the one that I would grab. Okay, I'm not going around grabbing packages, but it's the controller that I would go for at $10 more. The comment section of the initial KK3 Max review is awesome. I got a ton of information there. That's where I actually was informed about a lot of the things. For example, the paddles are labeled just really small. My old dusty eyes couldn't see it. I had to bust out the monocle. I mean, I can see it now by looking at it, but if I didn't know those were there, I don't think I would have found those. Also, I had no idea that there was that many quality control issues, that many complaints, that many unsatisfied customers until I read through the stories, the horror tales, if you will. There's quite a few. That's not good considering this controller just came out and it's supposed to have enhanced components over the King Kong 2. For example, those mechanical buttons, the orange plastic caps instead of a gray plastic cap that feel just like a stock membrane button. It's almost as if it is a stock membrane button inside of the housing of a mechanical switch. God damn, we've cracked the Da Vinci Code here, boys and girls, ladies as well. Make sure you subscribe, because the next video that's going to be trickling out of this channel's urethra tip is one about a very popular gamepad that we've talked about extensively on the channel. It's gotten a lot of hype, a lot of attention, and unfortunately, upon getting more stick time with it, there are more issues that have arose. Drop in the comment section below what you Stallions and Stallionettes are using to play your games on whatever it is that you game on, and I'll see you Stallions and Stallionettes tomorrow. Peace. If you enjoyed the video, liking it helps it to get seen by more gamers, so this information will reach and assist them as well. Much like the back of the TV, I've got plugs for all of my socials down there in the description below. And your wallet will greatly thank you if you check the description, because there are exclusive discounts on a ton of products, including controllers, KontrolFreeks, keyboards, mouse pads, clothes, and energy drinks. And keep in mind that you, the viewer, keep this channel running. The more Stallions and Stallionettes trotting around the stable, the better, so mollywop that subscribe button like it owes you money, and we'll have the same amount of fun tomorrow.